AI now and in the future, a roadmap to success. Now, I chose this topic area because I am a criminologist and criminal psychologist, and I do work in therapeutic jurisprudence, but I'm also an AI ethicist. So much of my work looks at AI ethics and how AI ethics informs business practices. So you can change the slide. When we talk about AI, we talk about the extraordinary promise of AI. We talk about speed, we talk about scale, we talk about pervasiveness, we talk about this technology or this suite of technologies being very powerful, having extraordinary potential. And we also talk about the peril of this technology, the danger of this technology. As we move forward, you can change the slide. Let's think about the moment that we are in right now. COVID-19 and this pandemic is creating the context for more and more industries to offer artificial intelligence as a solution. So we're talking about techno-solutionism. And while there are advantages to techno-solutionism, there are disadvantages. So COVID-19 has presented a very unique context. It has presented the perfect territory for aggressive data acquisition. So when we talk about data, we are talking about power. And we know now, because of this pandemic, data is more powerful now more than ever. We are also speaking about a digital Cold War. And you may have heard many of the experts speaking about this global grab for AI infrastructure as a fight for technological dominance. We are seeing that big tech is building an artillery of AI firepower, particularly within the realm of law enforcement, national security, defense, and of course now healthcare. Because of this pandemic, public health is now national security. We're also seeing the political power of data as big companies expand, big tech companies expand. What we are calling is AI expansionism. And in all of this, we've always got to understand that data could also be a mechanism of social control. Change the slide. What we've got to do is we've got to start thinking about future-proofing AI. How do you future-proof AI? You future-proof because it is a legacy technology. And you have got to ask yourself, as an individual and as an organization, what will be the legacy of your AI once it's designed, developed, and deployed? What if AI gets it wrong? We are seeing so much of that right now. What if AI gets it wrong? We've seen AI getting it wrong. We've seen people now being wrongfully arrested because of algorithms. We've seen algorithmic decision-making systems in the criminal justice system overestimating whether or not someone will reoffend. Opaque algorithms really clouding the process when it comes to due process. You've also got to ask yourself, do you have the right controls in place when it comes to the ethical frameworks that you are using? Are your practices aligned with industry standards and international best practices? Has your organization established a risk culture? Are you able to really detect risks, prioritize them, mitigate, manage, monitor, and improve your systems? Are your employees empowered to voice risk perceptions? Is there that level of openness in the organization when designers, developers, data scientists feel uncomfortable that they can really voice those concerns? What about independent experts to provide oversights throughout the life cycle of the design, development, deployment of the solution that you're creating? What about AI ethicists, ethical experts? Are they embedded in the organization? Now more than ever, we are seeing companies, big companies, embracing the concept of an AI ethicist to ensure that the AI is responsible and it's trustworthy. Global maturity, AI readiness. How ready is the organization, the community, the country for AI solutions? AI is about relationship building. And I want you to think about that, because many of the concerns, many of the risks, many of the ethical questions are coming back to the fact that that relationship has not been nurtured in a way that empowers the individual and the organization when it comes to understanding how to deploy this technology. So it's about a relationship that has got to be built on a new kind of literacy, what I call an AI literacy. And that AI literacy has got to be punctuated with a risk management approach. What about developing an ethical organizational culture? How ethical is your C-suite? Are you window dressing with ethics, or are ethics a real distinct part of the practice at the organization? What about what we call a culture of intellectual confrontation? That is so important, very, very important. You've got to ask yourself, are you ready to have that intellectual confrontation in the design, the development, and the deployment of your AI solutions? Because without that confrontation, you may be opening yourselves to an extraordinary amount of risks. And this comes back to your risk appetite. Are you adopting and applying principles that are respectful to the fundamental human rights and societal values as we move forward to the risky business of AI? We've seen it. We have seen the privacy violations. We have seen the bias, the discrimination, systemic racism baked into the data sets, unable to be distilled throughout the life cycle, and creating an extraordinary amount of risks when it comes to the design, development, deployment of your system. We have seen the accidents, in particular in the US, a GPS system that sent a bus under a bridge that it could not pass, creating an extraordinary accident. Automated and autonomous vehicles that have got themselves into accidents because it was not able to detect a person of color. We have seen robots in factories come into contact with humans. We have seen death. Manipulation of political systems. That's another risky business when it comes to AI. Disinformation. We are existing in the world of disinformation right now. What about deepfakes and the impact that could have on civil rights, on your political freedoms, undermining those freedoms? So when you're thinking about an AI system, you've got to think of the long-term consequences, the sociological impact of technology. You've also got to think more so of the consequences not yet known. This is a very new technology. We are now finding out how to manipulate and how to maneuver and how to navigate our way around this technology. So risk management has got to be critical. And I'm not talking about that old risk management that we did. This is a new type of thinking when it comes to understanding risk, when it comes to understanding the hidden consequences baked into those algorithms. So we know when it comes to risk, it creates significant challenges to the organization: reputational damage, revenue loss, regulatory backlash, criminal investigation, diminished public trust and public confidence in the organization. We have already seen all of these when it comes to AI. So what do? You embrace inclusive innovation. And inclusive innovation comes back to that culture of intellectual confrontation. So for it to be exclusive, you've got to ask yourself, who's at the table in the C-suite? Who is at the table in the design room? Who is at the table when we are looking at optimizing design? Because scholars have spoken about it, in particular when it comes to those hidden impacts of algorithms, when it comes to algorithms that could be extremely oppressive. What slips through the back door of design optimization? And I can tell you what slips through: bias, discrimination, prejudice, because we lack an inclusive approach to innovation. You will be called to defend your design decision. And we are seeing it more and more in the United States, where big tech is being called to defend those decisions. We have seen, particularly in the United States, because of the murder of George Floyd at the hands of those police officers in Minneapolis. We have seen, because of the social unrest right now in the United States, that big tech, IBM, stopped its development of facial recognition. Amazon has put a moratorium on facial recognition because now they're saying the risk is too much. These technologies are biased against people because of their race and because of their sex. And what they're saying is, we've got to rethink, we've got to reimagine. So algorithmic decision systems must operate within a context of due diligence, due process, and duty of care. And if it lacks that sense of inclusivity, you will not get that. So you've got to engage a diverse perspective. Diversity is imagination. The more diverse, the more imagination. And AI is probably our most imaginative piece of technology at this moment. So if your team is not diverse, you are undermining the imagination of your AI solution. You've got to bring a multicultural perspective because you are designing for a multicultural space, a multicultural country, multicultural consumers. So you've got to bring that diverse perspective. It's also about social responsibility. Social responsibility. It's about corporate citizenship and doing what is right. It's also about consumer protection and protecting the public interest. So diversity is also about public engagement and stakeholder engagement. And if you do that, then you are ensuring there is equity in the design. And you've got to remember, whenever you rely on data, ethical challenges occur. Data is very political. Every decision you make with data is a political decision, very important. You've also got to think about the privilege inherent in the data, because this is what we are seeing in particular right now. Everyone is talking about the data. Everyone is talking about how do we dismantle the data to remove those biases, to remove those prejudices, to ensure that systemic racism is not baked into it. It is extremely important. The whole process of data collection, of designing a question, a scientific question, inherently has power in it. So when it comes to navigating the minefield of insularity, I want you to think about the AI ego. And tech has an extraordinary ego. And that ego is great because it creates some of the most amazing solutions, but you've also got to think about visionary leadership. You've got to think about how do you disrupt without dysfunction. This question of AI ethics is right now the biggest question in artificial intelligence. It is the biggest discussion internationally at this moment. So if you are leading an organization, you have got to ensure those decisions are guided by values. You've got to ensure that what you are doing adheres to ethical codes and standards. And what it's calling you to do is shift from a posture of hindsight to foresight. It's about intuition to navigate insularity. And as we move forward, you have got to think about collaborating across disciplines. It is very important. So your work has got to be multidisciplinary. It has got to be multicultural. There's got to be that sense of digital intelligence in there, emotional intelligence, collaborative intelligence, and collective intelligence. These are very important concepts. And we're realizing now what's making or breaking an organization that is invested in designing and developing AI solutions at this moment is that question of ethics, And you've got to think about the hidden effects of algorithms. You've got to think about that, the hidden biases, codifying unconscious bias, codifying systemic racism, racialized predictions, the new types of institutional discrimination being created by those algorithms, and those levels of discrimination. And from the perspective of AI ethics, because AI ethics is seen now as the guardrail that is going to move AI development forward. And there are big things that you must always think about: privacy, accountability, safety, security. The question of transparency and explainability links directly with the black box, links directly with trade secrets, proprietary rights, intellectual property, but yet it is about transparency and explainability and accountability, fairness and non-discrimination, human-centered design, professional responsibility, human rights, and civil rights. So when you think about AI now, and when you think about AI in the future, it is about future-proofing today to ensure that tomorrow you have left the kind of legacy that you can be proud of. So the conversation about AI is not about profits at this moment. It's about people, and it's about designing a technology that does no harm. It is about regulation. It is about ethical innovation. It is not about a trade-off. So if there is anything that you can take from this conversation that I'm having with you, is that you are going to be called to account eventually for the kind of system you have designed, developed, and deployed. And when you are called to account, you have got to say, we applied the requisite due diligence. We ensured the due process and duty of care were really zoned into in a laser focused way. And in everything we have done, we have embraced a culture that is diverse, that is equitable, and that is inclusive. Thank you very much.